After weeks of fierce campaigning, polarizing debates, and targeted jibes, this is the moment of truth for the French Republic. People across the country are lining up at their nearest polling centers to cast their vote for the next president of France. The French Interior Ministry has announced that there was a 26.41% voter turnout until midday. The number is higher than the 25.48% turnout in the first round on the 10th of April, but lags behind the second round in 2017, when the rate at midday stood at 28.23%. Both presidential candidates, Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen, have cast their votes for the election. The 2022 polls have been termed as one of the most polarizing elections in the country's history. The choice is between two leaders with starkly different ideologies: incumbent president and centrist leader Emmanuel Macron and far-right leader Marine Le Pen. Macron topped the first round of votes. He is looking to secure a second consecutive term, something that has last happened in 2002 when Jacques Chirac was re-elected as France's leader. Now, Macron's first term has been turbulent. Under Macron, France has seen many predictable and unpredictable crises: yellow vest protests, COVID-19 pandemic, and the ongoing war in Europe. On the other hand, the vote is more than a presidential bid for Marine Le Pen. She needs the victory for her political career, because if she loses her third elections, then her position as the chief of the National Rally will be at risk.
La puissance et la force. Il n'y a que vous qui me donnez ça. C'est pour vous, je me bats. Vous n'oubliez jamais ça, hein?
Non, c'est bon, 5 secondes.
Now, for more updates on this, our correspondent Ross Cullen is joining us live from Paris. Hello to you, Ross. Can you begin by telling us what is the mood in Paris right now? President Macron is also set to address his supporters. What is the latest update?
Yeah, hi Alison, we're outside a polling station here in Paris, just under 3 hours left of voting, and so far the voter turnout as of 5 p.m, just over 63%. You mentioned the turnout at 12 p.m. local time. It does seem that there will be an abstention rate, perhaps more than 25% when the final tallies are in. A real high number of people who do not want to vote for Emmanuel Macron, do not want to vote for Marine Le Pen, choosing to stay at home today rather than cast a vote in the presidential election. It shows you that whoever wins will be up against the fact that there will have been millions of people who did not choose that president. But these are the two finalists from the first round, Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen, and you say that it's her third attempt at trying to win the presidency. Emmanuel Macron trying to become the first incumbent since Jacques Chirac in 2002 to be re-elected.
Right, and Ross, the trend tell us that Macron is still leading the opinion polls. However, as you've mentioned there, uncertainty due to the large number of undecided voters and, of course, Jean-Luc Mélenchon's vote base. Is there any clarity on that?
Yeah, Jean-Luc Mélenchon came third in the first round with more than 7 million people voting for him, particularly high demographics in the young and the green-minded. His manifesto was ranked the second most pro-environment after the Green Party's candidate. And so Emmanuel Macron has tried to play up his climate emergency credentials to deal with the loss of biodiversity and to deal with pollution in terms of trying to capture those people who voted for Jean-Luc Mélenchon in the first round. In terms of the polls, Emmanuel Macron was certainly leading going into the first round, going into this second round as well, projected to win around 55% of the vote. Marine Le Pen about 45% of the vote in the last polls that we saw on Friday before political surveys were banned over the weekend. So she does have, Marine Le Pen, a deficit to try to reduce, to try to eat into Emmanuel Macron's lead if she is going to overtake him and become France's first woman president.
Right, and Ross, we have seen Le Pen somewhat soften her stance on some of her more staunch far-right policies. Do you think that she has been able to effectively communicate her policies to the people of France?
One thing that certainly helped her was that she was actually outflanked on somebody who was even more extreme right. Eric Zemmour, who stood in the first round and didn't make it through to the second round, was further to the right than Marine Le Pen, aided her campaign of moderating her policies. We've seen her abandon her plan to leave the European Union, abandon her plan to leave the euro single currency, trying to show that she has softened her stance. She's dropped her surname from a lot of her campaign because it is tarnished with her father, who is seen as having racist policies when he stood against Jacques Chirac in the 2002 presidential election second round. And there was a link to the previous iteration of her party, the National Front. She threw her father out of the party, changed the party's name to the National Rally, and we have seen over the past few years try to renounce some of her more hardline policies. But she is still holding on to some of those more controversial measures, such as continuing with her policy. She underlined it again in Wednesday's political TV debate between Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen, that she is sticking with her plan to ban the Muslim headscarf in public spaces, something which Emmanuel Macron positioned himself vehemently against, something which Emmanuel Macron says would cause a civil war in the country. And so they are very different candidates standing on very different platforms, and we do now have just about 2.5 hours before we will find out who will be the next president of France from 2022 to 2027. Alison?
Ross, thank you very much for your insights and analysis there, and bringing us all the latest, of course, from Paris. And for further insights on the race to the Élysée Palace, Professor Emeritus of Modern History at the University of Oxford, Robert Gildeer, is joining us live from Paris. Thank you for your time and for being with us on this broadcast. Now, Professor, this is being dubbed as the most polarizing election in France in recent times. Two very different candidates with starkly different ideologies. What do you make of the French elections?
Well, as you say, it's very polarizing because you've got two very different candidates and a lot at stake. I mean, basically, Macron represents the kind of well-educated, the better off, the people living in the large cities, and he, in a sense, is a centrist, and he's very technocratic. Whereas Marine Le Pen represents, what she calls le peuple, ordinary people in the smaller towns and villages who are struggling with the cost of living, struggling with low pay, unemployment, and so on, and they feel left behind and ignored. But the other take on this is that Macron is a kind of globalist. He's happy with globalization, he's happy with Europe, whereas Marine Le Pen is a nationalist. She comes from a tradition of nationalism. It was her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, who ran Chirac a close race in 2002. And so she represents what she calls France for the French. And this is an idea of France for the French that goes back at least 100 years. And it's the idea that what they call the Français de souche, the people who were born and bred in France, should have greater rights than people of immigrant origin who have come in to the country from places like North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and so on. And so she believes very passionately in this nationalist model. And she's also, she's very worried about immigrants who tend to finish up in what they call the banlieue, the poorer parts around the cities. She says that these people are violent, they are into crime and drugs, very often they are Muslim, and she makes a kind of illusion between Islamism and terrorism. And so she as your previous correspondent says, one of the things she wants to do is to give the French-born people an advantage when it comes to housing or education or jobs, and she wants to ban, as you said, she wants to ban the veil from public spaces, and so they represent two very different elements or approaches to French history. And some people say that Marine Le Pen is actually a threat to the Republic. I mean, she's not a fascist. She's on the extreme right or on the far right, and people around Mélenchon and Macron say that she is actually a threat to the Republic.
Right. Professor, on that, taking into consideration the amount of support that Jean-Luc Mélenchon received in the first runoff, what do you think his supporters will do in this final round of voting?
Well, I've said, I mean, these are people who are also discontented, but they have a slightly different ideology. They're not racist. They're not anti-immigrant. They believe in sort of a multicultural France, and they're very often young people, students, wanting France to change and become more democratic, more open, more popular. And I have seen accounts that say that maybe half of them will vote for Macron. About 20% might vote for Le Pen, and the rest will abstain. And as your previous correspondent said, there is liable to be a huge abstention, because obviously 50% of people didn't vote for Macron or Le Pen, and then another 25% abstained in the first round. So both candidates have been trying to round up this support. But whether they will do it, I don't know. But Mélenchon was already talking about the third round, because France has legislative elections in June, and he's saying that the left is ready to come back and give Macron a hard time in the legislative elections.
Right, and talking more about the reports of voter apathy, we have seen the stats with the voter turnout being lower, and as my colleague Ross said, it has been lower at about 5 p.m. in Paris. What kind of effect could this have on the outcome?
Well, it's difficult to gauge, because I think if what you don't want to happen is that people who have abstained, go and vote for Marine Le Pen. But I don't think it'll have a huge effect on the outcome. I think as Ross said, it is the prediction of 55 Macron, 45 Le Pen that seems fairly possible. But what it will mean, as you've also discussed, is that after tomorrow morning or late tonight, there will be a huge millions and millions of French people who voted neither of these candidates, who think that Macron is the president of the rich. He's arrogant. He basically is taking through a neoliberal policy in France. He's increasing. He wants people to work longer and harder, and he wants to cut benefits. He's basically a sort of French Mrs. Thatcher, taking through those reforms in France much later than they happened in Britain. So he's not popular, and other people think that that Marine Le Pen represents something completely out of order, a form of nasty right-wing politics in France that goes back to the extreme right, the fascists of the 1930s and the Vichy regime of the 1940s, and they don't want to have anything to do with it. So I think that Macron will win, but there will still be an awful lot of discontented people, not just the people around Marine Le Pen, but the people around Mélenchon and other people on the left and the Green Party who don't see their person in power.
Right, Professor, we will leave it there. Thank you very much for your valuable insights. It's been a pleasure having you on this broadcast.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
WION, now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.